A high-stakes dinner with the president-elect, but was it enough to stop Donald Trump's tariff threat? On Friday, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau led a Canadian delegation on a trip to Mar-a-Lago. Over dinner, the Canadians discussed key issues and promised Trump more resources at the border. But sources tell CBC that Trump did not make it clear exactly what needed to be done to avoid 25% tariffs on everything coming into the United States. So, how is Ottawa translating that dinner conversation into a plan of action? I'm joined now by the Cabinet Minister at the left of this photo. Dominic LeBlanc is Minister of Public Safety, Democratic Institutions and Intergovernmental Affairs, and he joins me now. Minister, good to see you again. Thanks for being here.
Hi, David. Glad to be here.
So coming out of the Mar-a-Lago dinner, you've made a commitment to the President-elect of more helicopters and personnel deployed to the border to increase patrols. I mean, how many helicopters, how many personnel, what's the order of magnitude we're talking here? Because it's going to be pricey.
Sure. We hope it's significant. The cost to the Canadian economy of the tariffs is also massive. You can buy a lot of helicopters at Bell Helicopter in Mirabel, Quebec, for the RCMP, or drones for the cost of having to support the Canadian economy through those tariffs. So I met the Commissioner of the RCMP this morning, the President of the Canadian Border Services Agency. They have prepared for us a series of incremental additional measures that they think would be important for the government to approve quickly, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
No, look, the cost-benefit analysis of this is obvious when you look at the economic threat, but it is money that is unbudgeted and will need parliamentary approval, and nothing's getting through Parliament right now. So I'm trying to get a sense of the order of magnitude of what the price tag of this might be and how confident you are that you can get the approval you need to spend this money.
I can't imagine that the opposition parties, if we came before Parliament with some additional expenses supported by the advice of the Border Services Agency and the RCMP. A lot of this is equipment that they already have that we would simply supplement. We would add additional helicopters, drones. I had an interesting conversation with the incoming Commerce Secretary, Mr. Lutnick, around drones technology. He seemed very knowledgeable about drones that they're going to make in the United States. So it was a conversation around what additional steps we're going to take, but we also talked about the very considerable measures that are already in place, why we think the Canada-U.S. border is very much secure now. But the fight against fentanyl, organized crime, the Mexican cartels, the RCMP did phenomenal work. Federal policing, British Columbia taking apart a very significant fentanyl super lab, seizing huge quantities of fentanyl pills. So that work is ongoing. I think we need to show Canadians, and by extension our American friends, that that work is effective. And if we can do more, obviously we're going to do more. So we share entirely the objectives of Mr. Trump and his incoming secretaries who were at the table in terms of fighting fentanyl, fighting illegal migration, fighting other things that threaten the national security of Canadians.
Right, but I mean, the fentanyl issue, while a serious public health scourge, I mean, the amount of it going from Canada to the U.S., at least based on seizures, is a very tiny fraction of the overall picture. 20 kilograms, 43 pounds was the latest number. So I guess I wonder how many helicopters and how many extra staff and how many drones is Canada going to have to buy, and what's the price tag for that to deal with President-elect Trump's demands here?
Yeah, so when we have details of that, we'll be happy to talk about them when we're in a position to make it public. You'll understand that we're not necessarily going to announce to organized criminal organizations exactly how many drones will be in the air at what time and from what bases and what are the sectors of the border where intelligence says.
That's, in fairness, that's not what I asked, right? I mean, it's like, you know, like what's the order of magnitude? Are we talking hundreds of millions? Are we talking billions of extra dollars? What do you think it's going to be?
We'll have something to say, David. I understand why you asked the question. We're not in a position to publicly talk about that yet, but we understand the urgency of doing that. The Minister of Finance and the Prime Minister will make those ultimate decisions on expenditures. My job is to get from the RCMP and CBSA the list of equipment and additional personnel that they think would be important, and then ensure that my colleagues are in a position to approve it quickly.
Quickly, though, I mean, the timeline has to be really tight, right? Because the threat is by Inauguration Day, the 20th of January. There's only, 20 shopping days until Christmas. So you're going to run out of time to get this stuff done. So when will we have a clear sense of what the initial response is? I mean, are we going to know this before Parliament breaks for the holidays, or do we wait until January to get that stuff?
But again, once we have made those decisions around timing, we'll be happy to talk about it on the show. The important thing is that people know that that work is being done. We talked very directly with Mr. Trump. The Prime Minister engaged him very directly on the work that we're doing now at the border. We were able to talk, for example, the Five Eyes intelligence sharing agreement that Canada and the United States participate in with Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. Mexico's not in the Five Eyes. So you can imagine the literally joint work that's done in some cases every hour, every day with American intelligence authorities, U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, the Drug Enforcement Agency. It's important to take stock of the very extensive measures that are currently in place at the border. You referred to the reported seizures of fentanyl. In terms of magnitude, significantly less than other challenges. But the President talked to us about his concern around precursor chemicals coming from China that end up being used in these labs to make this toxic opioid that's sold in the United States and in Canada. So the RCMP have talked to me about the work they're doing with Chinese authorities now, a lot of it in partnership with the Americans. I think the conversation starts by taking stock of the great work that's already being done and asking the RCMP and the Border Services Agency to indicate what additional measures would strengthen the visible posture, and that's exactly what we're going to do. So
strengthening the visual posture. So this is the question. You said you came away from the meeting in Mar-a-Lago with a better understanding of what it is Trump wants to see. So what is the threshold for success for President-elect Trump? Do you think it's the response and the action and the scaling up of activity, or does he want data, as in migrant flows have reduced this much, fentanyl has reduced this much coming across the border? Because the numbers are pretty small. It'd be tough to drive them down necessarily. So what is the threshold to meet the expectations of the President-elect on this?
Again, a good question. I don't want to speak for Mr. Trump or his administration, of course, but they were quite prescriptive, particularly incoming Commerce Secretary or the future Commerce Secretary Lutnick, around what they were looking to see in terms of the fight against fentanyl, the fight against the Mexican cartels and other cartels manufacturing or seeking to export Chinese importation of precursor chemicals, and understand visually to see the extensive security operations that are currently in place at the border, and show them what additional steps we're prepared to put in place. So it's an ongoing conversation. I'm hoping to talk to Mr. Lutnick again in the coming weeks. We're not going to wait to January 20th to re-engage with a number of the people. The Prime Minister and the President, I'm sure, will speak again and speak often, but we also had the opportunity to see a number of very senior, the incoming National Security Advisor was at the table.
Right.
The Governor of North Dakota, who will be the energy czar, and the Secretary of the Interior, very knowledgeable about Canada. He talked to me about the 16 border crossings between his state and Saskatchewan and Manitoba. He talked to me about how much he likes Premier Moe, Premier Canoe in Manitoba. He knows Canada and appreciates Canada very well, and was very interested in the conversation around energy security.
Right.
So it was a wide-ranging. It was a social evening initially, David. You'll appreciate that it's a Friday night, Thanksgiving weekend. He was at his residence in Florida with a number of his incoming senior officials and their spouses. So nobody sort of gave us a checklist and said, this is what... We talked about a shared commitment to do the work we want to do with them.
But if they know Canada as well, as you say they do, and I'm sure they do, certainly the governor who's going to be the Interior Secretary, they must know that the flows are very small of fentanyl, right? So do you think they appreciate that the tariffs are symmetrical, the problem is asymmetrical in terms of what's happening? And do you have a sense of, did they give you, do you have a sense of what the benchmark is to clear to get out from under this threat?
So you're absolutely right. The tariffs appear symmetrical. The scale of the problem is not. We made that case to them, and we had examples, very specific examples, and we were able, I hope, to differentiate some of their security issues at different borders, their southern border versus the northern border. But we started by acknowledging that one fentanyl pill going into the United States from a lab, an illegal lab in Canada, is one too many. And we don't want them, by the way, on the streets in Canada either. And the number of people who die or are affected by that toxic drug crisis, by the toxic drug crisis in Canada, is also real. So they hadn't understood the extent to which we are seeing the devastating effects of that in Canadian cities. But again, our work now over the coming weeks is to continue the conversation, to show them why we think the Canadian border is secure, but also to recognize their concern around fentanyl or illegal migration. We have taken steps, significant steps, to reduce the number of people presenting themselves at the American border. My colleague Mark Miller tightening up visa requirements from some Indian nationals, changes we made to Mexico. We talked about how the numbers in the Swanton sector between Quebec and the northern states have come down considerably. But again, one van load of people is one van load too many for them. So we committed to continuing to drive those numbers down. That's what Mark Miller is going to do.
Okay, so a lot of work to be done, and you have at least some directional, ideas.
That's a good way to say it.
From the president-elect and his team. He has said some very critical things about Prime Minister Trudeau in recent months during the campaign, insulting things. Some national security advisor has also said some things about this government. I mean, how confident are you that the relationship will be good enough to work in the time you have before an election and before the deadline of January 20th to get to a solution on this? Because there have been some, criticism going both ways in the last year about each other.
I'm very confident, David. I met Mr. Trump for 5 seconds at the G7 in Charlevoix, Quebec, just shook his hand and said hello some years ago. But to watch the Prime Minister and the President discuss not only Canada-U.S. issues, but global issues, their impression of other G7 leaders, the war in Ukraine, the Middle East. The President was very engaged with the Prime Minister, and it was a warm, cordial evening. He was in a good mood. He talked about his election. We asked him questions about his election. I saw a lot of mutual respect between our Prime Minister and the President, but I saw a very warm, cordial Friday evening of Thanksgiving weekend in the United States. The President, at the end of the evening, walked us to the front door of Mar-a-Lago to the cars and said to the Prime Minister, keep in touch, we'll talk soon, call me anytime. It was, I think, a very, very important moment to say to the incoming President a few weeks after his election that we wanted to work with his administration because it's in the interest of Canadians that we do so. And we talked a lot about how the Canadian economy is so dependent on this integrated relationship with the American economy. He knows that. He's not insensitive to that. So I thought we achieved what we were hoping to achieve, but there's a lot of work ahead of us, and that's the work that we've started doing as early as Saturday, the day after the dinner. I'd exchanged messages with the incoming Commerce Secretary.
Okay, well, Dominic LeBlanc, we're out of time, but please come back when you can tell us more about what you're actually going to buy and how much it's
You'll invite me back, David?
You're welcome to come back with those details.
Anytime?
Yeah, anytime.
Oh, there you go.
All right, Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc. I'm like Trump. You can call me whenever you want.
Thank you, David.
Well, we now know more about Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's surprise meeting with President-elect Donald Trump. The dinner meeting was held at Trump's Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida, on Friday night. The two were joined by a contingent of top U.S. and Canadian politicians and advisors. They include Trump's national security advisor pick, Mike Waltz, and his wife, Trump's pick for Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, and his wife, Trump's Interior Secretary pick, Doug Burgum, and his partner, and Pennsylvania Senator-elect Dave McCormick and his wife. The Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, was there, as was Canada's Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc. They rounded out the dinner table. I spoke to LeBlanc earlier in the show about how that dinner went.
It was, I think, a very, very important moment to say to the incoming President a few weeks after his election that we wanted to work with his administration because it's in the interest of Canadians that we do so. And we talked a lot about how the Canadian economy is so dependent on this integrated
Yep.
relationship with the American economy. He knows that. He's not insensitive to that. So I thought we achieved what we were hoping to achieve, but there's a lot of work ahead of us, and that's the work that we've started doing as early as Saturday, the day after the dinner.
Meanwhile, Ontario is launching a multi-million-dollar U.S. ag campaign flexing the ties between that province and the United States.
For generations, this ally to the north has been by your side. Ontario, Canada, a partner connected by shared history, shared values, and a shared vision for what we can achieve together.
The ad went live this morning, and it's set to run throughout the holiday season and into the new year ahead of Donald Trump's inauguration. The ad will play during the primetime hours on Fox News and during NFL games, including Monday Night Football, and at airports in the Washington area over Christmas.
We are stronger together and weaker when we're apart. Again, those critical minerals go to the U.S. military. Every conflict they've had, we stand shoulder to shoulder, putting our Canadian soldiers' lives at risk, because that's what you do. When a family member is in an argument or a fight around the world, you stand beside them, you support them.
Okay, there's a lot going on, so a lot to talk about with the Power Panel. Vandana Cotter is a former advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Lisa Raitt is a former Conservative cabinet minister. Rob Russo is the former CBC Parliamentary Bureau Chief, now the Canada correspondent for The Economist. And Brad Levine is a former national campaign director for the NDP. Good to see you all. A lot has happened since we last spoke. Vandana, we went from the threat of tariffs to a First Minister's meeting to dinner at Mar-a-Lago, and now an ag campaign and a whole response plan from the federal government. Yeah, exactly. I mean, what do you make of where we are? What does it say about Canada's ability to move fast when there's a crisis?
Well, we've seen during the pandemic that Canada can move very fast. And also, this Prime Minister, for those who underestimated him, already has dealt with this precedent. This is his fourth precedent in a way. So he would have had this relationship already. I'm sure a team around him would have kept relationships they've had with the Trump administration and those key officials. So I wouldn't be surprised that, as soon as this announcement on tariffs took place, they spurred to action. I understand this invitation came after the call with the Prime Minister. So, it tells me that this government has the experience to engage with with the Trump administration, but also to sell Canada and to talk about shared priorities, including what's happening on the border, and to reassure them and make sure that we're fighting for the needs of Canadians.
So, Lisa, it's interesting, the secrecy around the dinner. I mean, because people were saying there's no plan, what's he going to do? And because the Trump team, I'm told, wanted everything kept quiet until the dinner actually started. So, a week of that, and knowing you had dinner at Mar-a-Lago coming up on Friday. I mean, what do you make of this move and where things seem to be 72 hours later?
I'm very glad as a Canadian that the Prime Minister went to Mar-a-Lago and met with Mr. Trump. I think that was the right thing to do. I'm really glad that they brought Dominic LeBlanc along, quite frankly. David, you call him the Ministerial Janitorial Services. Well, once again, he's pressed into action on a big file, and I'm glad to see that he's there. I think that we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves. This is one step. It's one of many steps that we're probably going to end up taking with Canada and the United States. I'm glad that Doug Ford put the ads out. I think anytime we have the opportunity to show that we do have connectivity is good. But all of that to say, words are words, dinner is dinner, but action is what's going to matter to Mr. Trump. And he will continuously hold out the threat of tariffs over our heads should we not be doing things that he views as something that's important for the United States and for his own administration. So great first step, but don't think it's all over yet.
No, Rob, I think you were my boss during Trump 1, and we all know it's not over yet, right? Because it's going to be a long 4 years if this is any indication. But what do you make of this move that they got in to see him pretty quickly? And Dominic LeBlanc says they don't necessarily have a resolution, but they have some directional ideas of what the president-elect needs to see.
Well, you know, David, that I was in Washington long enough to cover 2 presidential administrations. And I used to see people come and go into the White House. And I can tell you that almost any leader of any country would give one of their digits if they could get 3 hours to sit beside the President of the United States to talk about their problems. So anybody who's suggesting that this wasn't a good idea, this whole notion of kissing the ring in it, doesn't really know about the importance of face-to-face diplomacy, that kind of access to a U.S. president-elect. It's invaluable. So what did he get out of this is what we're going to have to be watching for this. He got the time. He certainly got a list of demands. But what I would want to know, and what I hear Derek Burney, who I saw work his magic during the first free trade agreement, ask is, what are you getting for Canada out of this? Okay, we know what Mr. Trump's cards were on the table. They were about fentanyl and they were about border security. What cards did we play? And Doug Burgum's presence there, as well as the wife of the NSA designee, Mike Waltz, his wife, who is a vice president at TC Energy,
right,
who just happens to be the owner of the Keystone Pipeline. That tells us that Canada had other cards that they were playing as well. I want to know what we got out of Mr. Trump and his people in the way of assurances of potential flooding towards our border if Mr. Trump goes ahead with his plan to expel 13 million people. I want to know what we got in exchange for our assurances that we were going to work perhaps towards on getting more oil to the United States, more crude oil that would keep people who are employed in those refineries in Texas, in Mississippi, in Alabama that can't count on Canadian crude. What did we get in return? It's a two-way street. And as Lisa said, I think people should understand that we had cards on the table. The other cards are going to be Mr. Trump's. He's going to play the king of clubs. He's not going to stop here. He's going to come after us on NATO and defense spending. And he's going to come after us on our marketing boards, on our supply management, because he won in Wisconsin.
Right.
So we should be prepared for him to slam the table with some other cards and more threats on tariffs.
No, I think that's a safe bet, Brad. But I wonder, like, as Rob said, like the importance of the FaceTime, the importance of the meeting. There was a moment in question period today to reference what Rob talked about. Brad Redekop said the Prime Minister went to Mar-a-Lago to kiss the ring and returned with absolutely nothing. I mean, what do you think? Is that a fair characterization? We don't know yet. I mean, is that a fair characterization? What do you make of that move?
Well, it's question period. It's politics. So no, I mean, but I don't think that I mean, so I agree with the other panelists that it's a positive step. I think Trump is more of a relationship, transactional. It's over. I don't believe that it is one and done. That is, you go down to Mar-a-Lago for 3 hours and all of a sudden all of the irritants that he's been campaigning on for 2 years, Trump has, are going to go away. This is going to be a long, protracted engagement. To Rob's point, I think there's lots of things on the table. We're going to have to do some things domestically in order to get some of those tariff issues squared away, but then there's going to be other things as well. I like the issue of immigration. I think oil and energy security for the continent is there. And I think the timing of the Ontario ads are good. I think this is exactly the right time to be flooding the key markets with that. I thought the ads were fairly well done. I like I think the language around shared values is a good one. Right. It's at a very elementary level. It's very basic. Most Canadians will say, well, of course, but the audience here, Team Canada back in 2016, 2017, it was about state governments. It was about House of Representatives. It was about governors. It was kind of elected to elected. I like the idea of going to the people, particularly in swing states that went for Trump in the last round. I think that's a very smart play on behalf of the government of Ontario. So,
Vandana, we know that Doug Ford has taken this very seriously because, let's face it, that Ontario manufacturing sector and the auto sector, the northern critical minerals, critical stakes for everybody, but Ontario in particular, given this. We know the federal government, through Minister LeBlanc and others, are going to respond with helicopters, drones, and police officers in some magnitude at the border. What do you think the bar is they need to clear? Is it just coming at this with critical mass of response, or do they need to drive down fentanyl below the really low numbers it already is? Like, how do we know?
I actually think they need to figure out a way to show Mr. Trump that he can get a political win out of this. Really, it's about posturing. Mr. Trump made a statement that would have been very popular with Americans, same way that anytime you say Team Canada, we're fighting for Canada, that's going to be popular with all Canadians across the board. So it's so Trump made this request. He's going to show, we're going to go back, we're going to do things that make sure that they feel, although we feel that the border is secure, give them reassurances that it is, but how does he also get a win for his base, right? To show that, I asked this for Canada, I got this for Canada, so that as he negotiates with us, so we talked about Keystone, we talked about other resources that we have that we want to get at the table, how does he not lose face? And how does he show that, this worked out for me because we got what we wanted? And that's what they really have to do to help set up Trump and put Canada in a good position. So,
Lisa, how do you do that? I mean, are helicopters, extra patrols, extra police officers, and drones? Is that enough? I mean, what do you think the bar is that Canada needs to clear here?
I think it's going to be up to Mr. Trump. I think he looks at results. I don't think he looks at the number of police officers on the border. And I know that we don't have as big a problem with fentanyl coming in from the north as it is coming in from the south in the United States. But I do believe that it's on the increase. And I do believe that there's great concerns about organized crime taking root in Canada, being able to produce fentanyl in different ways and sending it to the U.S. and stopping that route before it actually takes hold. I think this is an important factor as it is decreasing the amount that's going across. So putting some real intelligence behind this, working with the counterparts in the United States. Remember, Mr. Trump is getting intelligence from his own people indicating what really is the problem with fentanyl. And we have to assume that he's hearing some scary stuff. And we know that there's some stuff happening in BC and Alberta that isn't pleasant and that it's starting to increase. So stopping it now makes a lot of sense. And if he can see that stopping and intelligence tells him it's stopping, that's probably a good thing.
Rob, there's no question that fentanyl, I think it killed 150,000 Americans over the last year or two. It's a problem, obviously, in Canada. But, the Drug Enforcement Agency in their annual reports, according to some reporting in the Globe and Mail, it's Mexico they focus on. It's not Canada. I think it was 43 pounds, about 20 kilos, that was intercepted going from Canada into the U.S. A lot of our stuff ends up in the Pacific market, and Australia. So, I mean, what is it you think Canada can demonstrate to the United States? I mean, to Lisa's point, he wants results. Is an increase in helicopters a result? Do you know what I mean? Like, this is the challenge in understanding Trump here.
Yeah, look, I think this is more about leverage than logic. There is no logic to the suggestion that we merit a 25% tariff based on our fentanyl threat to the United States compared to China or to Mexico. It's about leverage. He does want to see results. This is an area where we do have dovetailed interests, where it's in the interests of both of our countries to do something about fentanyl and to do something, quite frankly, about people coming in and out of both of our countries who we don't want to come in and out of our countries. So there are things that we can do that can benefit both countries, but nobody should lose sight of the fact that we don't represent a fentanyl threat to the United States the way Mexico does. Again, it's about leverage. The guy's doing a flex. Mm-hmm. He essentially declared victory in his social media post today by saying, look what I did. I already got them to dance a little jig for us. So if that's what it takes, and it's in our interest, that's fine. But we need some hard-nosed bargaining on our side of the fence in response to that, saying, what are you going to do for us?
Right.
A few years ago, I was talking to a senior person in the military whose job was to prepare for what they called unexpected, irregular migration into Canada. We have a plan. We have DND who's been working on this plan for some time. At the time, they thought that this irregular migration, unexpected, might be caused by climate change. Now we know that it might be caused by Donald Trump's
mass deportation
plan to expel illegal aliens. So let's see what that plan says, and then go to the United States and say, what are you going to do to help us put this plan into place?
Okay, Brad, just a quick final point from you in terms of, I think Lisa's right? He wants results. Wab Kinew has made the point all week, we can't argue our way out of this, right? Because the argument on these tariffs is obvious, but I don't think that matters, right? So, I mean, what do you think it is that will get this done by January 20th? Do you think the helicopters and police officers is enough?
Yes. Well, because they can be counted, right? So it's metrics. Right. So when he stands there on Inauguration Day, the day before, the day after, and he's talking about the impact that he's having on the change that he was elected to bring in, he can already point to his northern neighbor who are making either increased expenditures on things like tightening up the border. I don't know if the fentanyl count can be accurate by then to show a demonstrable reduction. Yeah. Who knows? But buying stuff pointing to metrics that the North is moving will be good enough for him because it's a political win. This is all about political win. He's 49 days away from being inaugurated, and he's already moving domestic policy in Canada. It's quite incredible, to be honest with you, and I find it taken aback that so many people are moving so quickly based on this guy a month and a half before he takes office.
Well, not just Canada, Mexico too.
No,
so I mean, it is wild the disruptive impact he's already had.